Hello lovely people, my name is Emma. Welcome to my channel and welcome back if you're new. That ain't it. Today I want to talk to you about book bans and why I've just about come to the conclusion that we are in a new age of book bans. News of successful book bans in various places is now coming so thick and fast that we're no longer in dangerous precedent territory. We're no longer in what's Florida up to now territory. And I'm going to use a couple of specific examples today from both the USA and the UK. Let's start with this. Department of Defense sued over book removals, curriculum changes in its schools. We're going to look at this story using Ground News, who is also the sponsor of today's video. More about them in a little bit. A dozen students from Defense Department grade schools are suing the Department of Defense over book removals and yearbooks being censored. Good! The American Civil Liberties Union filed the lawsuit on behalf of 12 students from military families attending schools in Virginia, Kentucky, Italy, and Japan. The lawsuit claims that the students' First Amendment rights were violated due to censorship of materials about race and gender in military-run schools. The litigation challenges executive orders aimed at enforcing anti-diversity and anti-LGBTQ+ measures in K-12 schools. It will not surprise any of you to learn that statewide book bans in the USA, as well as the county-wide book ban that we're going to talk about a bit in the UK, are all banning books specifically related to LGBTQ+ information topics. Using Ground News' bias comparison tool, we can see how the left and right and the centre differ in the telling of this story. Left-leaning outlets frame the book removals as banning and censorship. I would argue they frame it that way because that is what it is. Linked to the Trump administration's policies, emphasizing race and gender-related content and sparking on-base protests, while right-leaning outlets employed skeptical framing, using alleged book bans and highlighting the removal of woke books, signaling a dismissive stance. Center-leaning sources adopted a neutral tone. The term DEI triggered divergent reactions, with right-leaning sources emphasizing Trump's efforts to eliminate it from military institutions, while left-leaning sources de-emphasized it, and center-leaning sources neutrally reported its role in the executive orders. While all sides acknowledge ACLU's lawsuit, the choice of language and focus underscored contrasting values concerning censorship, diversity, and the role of executive power, reflecting broader ideological divides on social justice and educational content. And yet, I would rush to point out, I must interject, every time we discuss censorship, it is right-wing media, right-wing personalities, right-wing politicians who are usually the most outspoken on the topic of free speech and anti-censorship. Unless you're censoring minority topics. Censorship is terrible unless you're censoring books about being gay. Then censorship is top. Then free speech doesn't matter. It's so deeply frustrating that censorship and free speech, etc., is just sort of a tool. It's not something that's actually believed in by really any mainstream right-wing people and parties that I've seen. Because it is just a case of free speech for me and what I want to say. I shouldn't be punished for posting hate speech on the internet, for example, but I should be allowed to prevent school children from reading about LGBT+ topics. It's so incredibly hypocritical. We can't have this conversation without acknowledging that. We can see here that 60% of the sources on this story are center, which is quite good for us. Right-leaning sources are in the minority at 11%. That doesn't surprise me. This is great for us here because 93% of the sources are high factuality. So we can see here something that came up in the bias comparison. A right-leaning source, American Military News, Defense Department sued over Trump admin's alleged book bans. And then we have a left-leaning source, Alternet, I could not abide, military mom, Suing? This is such a serious topic for me to fuck up basic English. Military mom suing Trump admin over her kid's right to learn. NBC Washington, very high factuality, left-leaning, this is what I'm going to look at. Families suing DoD over alleged whitewashing of curriculum at military schools. Let's take a look at this one because it is a high factuality source, bearing in mind that this is a left-leaning source. Military families are suing the Department of Defense for allegedly whitewashing curriculum at schools on military bases. The lawsuit, which accuses DoD schools of banning diverse books, cultural heritage months, and student protests, this is actually much greater than a book ban. This is banning all forms of just acknowledgement of diverse cultures, comes as the Trump administration targets mentions of diversity and gender in education. ACLU of Virginia Senior Supervising Attorney Matt Callahan says something that I 100% agree with. Censorship is always the wrong choice, and it's certainly the wrong choice here. Callahan is helping 6 military families sue the Department of Defense and Secretary Pete Hegseth for allegedly violating their children's First Amendment rights. The schools are accused of banning books like To Kill a Mockingbird, Fahrenheit 451. Those are 2 of my favorite books. To Kill a Mockingbird was one that I studied in school, and it was a really pivotal moment in our education. There was a revival of To Kill a Mockingbird on stage a while ago that maintained the overall themes of the original book while challenging some of the sort of white savior aspect that makes it a little bit uncomfortable in hindsight, and it was so good. I love To Kill a Mockingbird. I think it's really important. It's ironic that Fahrenheit 451 is about book burning. There's no sense of maybe we shouldn't ban this one just in case somebody picks up on the irony of us banning books about banning books. Kite Runner, Well-Read Black Girl, and The Anti-Racist Kid. Those don't surprise me, but it's still an outrage. In the lawsuit, the ACLU also lists other books allegedly under review by DoD for a possible ban. When you're trying to control people's access to information and the society, I think any books about dissent, about the struggle for liberation, can be a threat. Seeing some of the books that are being banned, and the fact that it isn't just... Because it's, what usually the big argument is about when it's like some parent, some political group, whoever is up in arms about a book that shouldn't be allowed in school, it's usually something along the lines of, it's okay to be gay. That's generally what they are removing. And then there was the big stink about critical race theory and US history curriculums that taught about the real impact of colonialism, the history of systemic racism in the United States, etc., etc. But this administration is also targeting books that are about yes, often about those topics, but about challenging the system, challenging the state that is responsible for this injustice is so telling and so frightening. I think people should be, okay, granted, from the beginning, people should have been afraid of the Trump administration because he has been anti-democracy through his actions from the start. We should all always have been very worried about the Trump administration, but this is just another checkbox for, oh dear God, we need to be aware of this and stop it right now. We think this is a really important struggle to make sure students get exposed to those ideas, things they might not have considered on their own, experiences that aren't their own. According to the lawsuit, schools on military bases also allegedly have been getting rid of lessons on slavery, Native American history, LGBTQ identities, and how to prevent sexually transmitted diseases, sexual harassment, and abuse. What could be more important to teach children than how to recognize signs of abuse, how to deal with it? Practicing safe sex is its own controversial topic. It's almost as if that having this awkward, funny, clinical conversation in the classroom about how to practice safe sex is going to encourage children to have sex somehow. Anybody who's been to a sex ed class knows that is not the case. All it means is that the young people that were going to have sex anyway know how to do it in a way that prevents health issues and unwanted pregnancies. By censoring the health information that reaches students in class, the government isn't changing any of the aspects of life. They're just making students less prepared for it. Callahan and we are on the same wavelength. In addition, the lawsuit accuses DoD school administrators of going through high school yearbooks to make sure they don't have any references to gender ideology. Man, the word ideology is thrown around so casually by the right these days that I don't think anyone knows what a fucking ideology is anymore. Being trans, being non-binary, being in some way other than cis and het, whatever, is not having an ideology. The lawsuit comes about 3 months after President Donald Trump, ironically, signed an executive order called Ending Radical Indoctrination in K-12 Schooling. What could be more a sign of indoctrination than preventing young people from knowing and learning about political dissension, diverse cultures? It's so transparent. Let's take a look at American military news just to get just to see both sides of the spectrum. The Department of Defense was sued on Tuesday by the American Civil Liberties Union. Multiple military students and the family members of military students over various book bans and curriculum changes implemented amid President Donald Trump's effort to remove diversity, equality, and inclusion from the federal government and America's military institutions. The lawsuit states the Department of Defense education activity is quarantining library books and whitewashing curricula in its civilian schools. Right now, DoDEA is scrubbing references to race and gender from its libraries and lessons with no regard to how canonical, award-winning, or age-appropriate the material might be. That's another thing. There's a lot of these books that are unacceptable for children, and they're gonna make the kids gay, or make the kids have sex, or, you know, make the kids not racist. Oh no. They're written for children. They're usually in these school libraries because they are specifically made to be age-appropriate for children. Sorry, I just noticed that the lid wasn't on my bottle and I can see me having a disaster. Emerson Sykes, an ACLU senior staff attorney, said these schools are some of the most diverse and high-achieving in the nation, making it particularly insulting to strip their shelves of diverse books and erase women, LGBTQ people, and people of colour from the curriculum to serve a political goal. Ooh, well put. This right-leaning source has included a lot of really good information and quotes that we didn't get in the other source. That's great. That's interesting. Here, Ground News has given us an overview of this story that has 87 total sources. There's no way I would have been able to scrub through 87 sources on my own, but thanks to Ground News, we get a great overview of the bias distribution of this story, the factuality rating of the people who are covering it. It was really easy for us to identify that a minority of sources reporting on this are right-leaning. I bang on about Ground News all the time. You know that I use it. I think it's the best way to get an overall view of every story, to find related stories really easily, to see what is being covered by one side or other of the political spectrum, to break out of your bubble. If you don't want to take my word for it, the Nobel Peace Center recently called Ground News an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. This is Kirsty Flugstad. I'm probably getting that name so wrong. I'm so sorry, but that's the executive director of the Nobel Peace Center who said this. Their approach to fostering a deeper understanding of how biases shape our perceptions is inspiring, and we're proud to showcase their platform at the Nobel Peace Center. I just thought that was really cool, and given what we're talking about today, in a world of ever-expanding censorship and social pressure and the news getting more and more divisive, it is just so important to be not just up to date on the news, but to know exactly what you're reading, and Ground News makes that so easy. Plus, if you go to my link, groundnews.com/EmmaThorne, or scan my QR code, you get 40% off unlimited access to the Vantage plan. That's the same plan that I use every day to see all of my news. Ground News is subscriber funded, it's fully independent, so not only is the Vantage subscription a good way to get your news and break out of your social bubble, etc., you're also supporting an independent platform that's helping make the news more transparent. Plus, and my last PSA, a lot of us get our news from things like social media. I pick up a lot of news just in the Google thing on my phone. Ground News is actually a platform that doesn't feed you stories based on your clicks, which pretty much every other source will do. Check it out, groundnews.com/EmmaThorne, scan my QR code. Thank you so much for listening, and to Ground News for sponsoring this video. Let's take it to the UK, my home planet. Here's a more recent story that, I'm gonna say, curdled my blood. Boiled my blood is probably a bit more traditional as a phrase, but nah, I'm fucking curdled. Accommodate transgender students within reason. Kent County Council, controlled by Reform since May elections, Reform UK, if you're not familiar, UKIP 2.0, Neagle Feagle, everything is immigrants' faults, but sometimes it's also LGBT people's faults. We take on the political elite, even though a huge proportion of Reform UK now is the political elite. So many of the anti-immigrant, anti-elite parties are made up of really wealthy people married to immigrants. Guys. Kent County Council, controlled by Reform since May elections, announced a removal of transgender-related books from children's library sections. So this is a very specific attack on trans people, specifically on trans youth, because what we're doing here, it's not that this is hurting like the sales of books or anything like that. What it's doing is limiting young people's knowledge of trans people. If you learn about people with diverse gender identities, etc., at a young age, you're going to be more compassionate and accommodating to those people. Similarly, if you are a young trans person and you learn about trans people, you might find that, hey, you're not alone. Reform UK doesn't want kids to feel like that. It doesn't want kids to feel seen. It wants kids to stay in the closet. This is the same as every, like, book banning movement. Whatever, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but let's just say it rustles my jimmies. The decision was prompted by a concern from a member of the public and was revealed through social media posts instead of being presented during a council meeting. 2025. Social media dictates the real lives and liberties of actual human beings. Council leader Lyndon Kemkaran defined the move as a victory for common sense. They love common sense arguments, even though as soon as you actually break down these discussions, using science or social studies or anything like that, it is not the most common sense thing to discriminate against people who are different from you. It turns out it's not the common sense thing. It's the I lack understanding on this topic thing, which is what people mistake for common sense. That's why we call it common sense fallacy. While Liberal Democrat opposition leader Anthony Hook criticised the process as bizarre and vague. Thanks, Anthony. Paul Webb, cabinet member, stated children are properly protected from harm like alcohol and gambling, and issued the removal instruction after finding trans-ideological books in children's sections. The implication being that books that say that trans people exist are the same as pro-gambling and alcohol advertising. Common sense. The ban sparked backlash from LGBTQ+ campaigners who called it censorship, because it is, and a targeted attack on trans and neurodivergent communities, while the council affirmed no adult trans books will be accessible to children. Labour MP for Chatham and Aylesford, Tristan Osborne, has labelled the removal of the books as unedifying gender baiting of the LGBT community. According to the BBC, one book in particular that had been removed was The Autistic Trans Guide to Life by Yen Perkis and Wen Lawson. It emboldens anti-trans rhetoric and contributes to a culture where marginalised people feel unsafe, unwelcome, and silenced. Erin Strawbridge, the manager of the Folkestone Bookshop, an LGBTQ+ bookstore, said censorship does not stop people from learning information, but it does send the message, and it's sending a message to the young people of Kent that they're not safe and they're not welcome if they're LGBT or trans. It pushes kids into the closet, into worse mental health situations. It's just going to scare young people. It also emboldens kids who maybe unfortunately have transphobic parents or bigoted parents in some way. It emboldens that ideology, if you'll forgive my use of the word. If your council does something, your local council is saying that these books aren't acceptable on these topics, that makes those views that would otherwise have been challenged in school, where they get to experience a more diverse culture, instead it makes those ideas mainstream. So, oh, what my parents are telling me is what the council is saying. So I must be right, and those people are bad. And then that's how you get bigoted adults. So I found this opinion piece from last year on Scientific American, Book Bans Harm Kids. And I just thought I'd read some of it for you because I thought it was quite good. In 2023, the American Library Association documented more than 1,200 cases of efforts to ban library books. Book bans themselves are robbing youngsters of opportunities to think critically, explore ideas, and learn about experiences different from their own. The people responsible for moving books from classrooms and library shelves are trying to limit the flow of information. Their efforts aim to undermine democracy. They would create an electorate of young people who will not question authority, build alliances with people who have less political power, or challenge the status quo, which reflects really well what we read earlier. Petitioners targeted more than 4,200 books for removal from schools and libraries. The most contested books of 2023 include classics such as Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, modern novels and graphic novels about growing up LGBTQ+, a book about teen health, another about human trafficking. PEN America, a non-profit that advocates for free expression in literature, noted more than 3,300 efforts to ban books in schools during the 2022 to 2023 academic year. I also found this Psychology Today article, Why Book Bans Are Bad for Mental Health. Research shows that books about characters who are not like the reader are the best for building empathy, of course. Book bans may negatively impact the mental health of marginalised individuals, librarians, and youth. Children and teens suffer when books are banned in their schools and public libraries for many reasons. As young people are in a development period of identity formation with a strong focus on peer relationships, banning diverse books robs them of the opportunity to have an open dialogue and engage in critical thinking in a safe, supportive environment. Youth are likely to seek information elsewhere, from unmonitored, unsafe sources without the support of trusted adults. That's another great point. The reality is that everyone loses when books are banned because it discourages reading, turning our attention towards social media, web surfing, and television, which negatively impacts the brain's ability to sustain attention, reduces long-term memory formation and retrieval, and discourages analytical thinking. Additionally, this kind of censorship increases discrimination as readers get the message that certain groups of people and topics are bad, closing our minds to the opportunity to learn, which is what reading is all about. Most importantly, when books are banned, we're missing out on one of the most valuable benefits of reading, cultivating empathy. So, I've actually done this before, because like I say, book banning is nothing new. In recent history, it is becoming increasingly common. So I'll just leave this as a reminder. One of the biggest historical book bans over here was of the New Testament, the English translation by William Tyndale. Thousands of copies of this translation were smuggled into England from Germany, where they were publicly burned in 1526 on the orders of London's Roman Catholic bishop. This was for the same reason that books are always banned, which is that the authority, in this case it was the Catholic Church, the English Catholic Church, wanted to control the flow of information. In that instance, they wanted the Bible to only be available in Latin so that only they were able to read and interpret it and instruct people on how they should be interpreting the Bible. They didn't want people to be able to read it for themselves. It's the same thing now. If you, my constituent, are able to access a diverse library of reading, if you are able to learn about various ideologies, etc., then you are less likely to accept my impetus. You are less likely to accept what I say is the case, is the best way to think, the correct way to think. Therefore, we ban the books. Not only do we limit your knowledge of what ideas are available, but we limit your critical thinking skills so that you are more likely to agree with what we tell you to think. If it sounds like I'm being conspiratorial or like over the top, let's look at the most famous and well-known instances of book banning. China, the Chinese Communist Party, has a long history of censorship, not just of books, but including of books. Particularly anything political that challenges the government or the Chinese government's interpretation of Chinese history. Russia. And is it any surprise that Trump, who idolizes Vladimir Putin, is banning or attempting to ban books on very similar topics? Books about LGBTQ+ identities. And again, any works critical of the government. Saudi Arabia has a history of banning books that again contradict their country's values, their Islamic values. Banning books for reasons such as intellectual security. We in the United States and the United Kingdom tend to have this view of ourselves as freer than much of the known world. Freedom of speech and freedom of expression is generally very important to us, as is the natural diversity of our cultures. We're nothing without our diversity. It's our whole history. It's easy to think of places like North Korea, China, etc. as a sort of dark other. That the things that the government does there could never touch us over here. But it is within our own democratic systems that these are taking place. It was recently ruled in Florida that trans teachers aren't allowed to use their preferred pronouns in the classroom if they contradict with what they were assigned at birth. When you think about the number of teachers and students who use things like nicknames, it seems absurd. The idea of having a teacher who's a woman and being forced to call her Sir or Mr. is not just dangerous and upsetting, but weird. It doesn't seem like something that should be possible in the freest country in the world. But it is. It's happening. It's real. Real life censorship, real life book bans. It's happening now. It is hard to keep on top of all of the sometimes frightening and devastating news, but you have to be aware of this kind of thing because the fact that these things idly happen without that much awareness is how they are allowed to happen. It's important to be politically aware so that you can use your voice and your vote wisely to challenge these terrible things. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do check out Ground News. Sorry that it's a bit of a serious one today. I saw the news about more book bans and this the slightly positive news about this legal challenge to the Department of Defense's military schools banning certain books and classes. And then I thought, okay, well, that's a good thing, maybe we can talk about. And then I saw that Kent's Reform Council had actually successfully, legally banned diverse books from children's libraries, it just upset me so much. I don't want to live in that world, you know? And I do. We all live in this world. So the only thing we can do is try and change it for the better, right? It is upsetting sometimes to feel like, hey, we live in the dystopia. The dystopia is coming to fruition before our very eyes. And we gotta do everything we can to stop it. And talking about it and bringing awareness to the issue is one of the things that I can do with this silly platform. So sometimes we talk about the serious stuff. I hope that's okay. The best way to support this channel and what we do here is via the Patreon. With that, I will give a big old shout out and a thank you to my giant chickens and colossal quackers over on Patreon. Most importantly, have a lovely week, take a rest and a breather from the news if you need to, and I will see you really soon.